Okay guys, today I'm going to start a series of short videos that I called Speed Training Secrets and show you what are some of the biggest reasons why so many of you today are struggling to get faster in your sport. The information I'm going to share with you is going to help you immediately perform better in football, basketball, baseball, tennis, soccer, and really any sport where speed is critical for your success. This information will also help you form a solid foundation for running faster, jumping higher, and jumping longer. And if you play in a sport that involves kicking, such as soccer, or if you are the punter or place kicker on a football team, it's also going to help you in just days improve your kicking height and distance. Now in this video and the ones that follow, I'm going to start talking to you about two of the most powerful muscle groups in your body, and that's your hip flexors and your hip extensors. And while you still may not have activated each of these muscle groups the right way for blazing speed and quickness with your current training methods, and when you start to train them the way I am going to personally teach you here in these videos, it will be like unleashing a huge reservoir of untapped muscular energy. We're also going to talk about your fast twitch muscle fibers, and you've heard of those, right? And while many who think they are training them properly for speed and quickness are really only performing a modified strength training exercise, seeing little to no gain in speed as a result. And in an upcoming video following this one, I'm going to give you the opportunity to try a sample exercise that will turn on these fast twitch fibers and will literally transform your athletic ability in just a couple of minutes a day. Now, this exercise in that video is already responsible for helping over 100,000 athletes run faster, and it'll do the same for you. So be sure to look for that information because you certainly don't want to miss it. In addition to all this, I'm going to be covering something called your turnover rate and how this affects your running speed, your jumping height, and your kicking distance, and how if you ever want to be an all-star athlete and let's say be able to separate yourself from a defender to make a play, or perhaps become a better defender in football and never let your man get open like a shutdown cornerback, or even something like stealing second base in baseball, you will absolutely need to start training to improve this area immediately. And finally, I'm also going to give you what I consider some bonus information in my fourth video that you're going to get in a few days. And in that video, I'm going to talk in more detail than I ever have before on how isometric training using the resistance band is able to condition your muscles for blazing speed and quickness unlike anything else you've ever done. So we've got a lot to cover here in this video and in the ones to follow. And if you watch them all, I promise you, you're going to become a more dynamic, a more complete, and a way more confident athlete. You're going to be the one who makes the headlines and leads your team to victory. I really mean this. I see it happen on a regular basis, and now for the first time, I'm going to personally help coach you right here, right now, to your next level of success. So let's get started. I want to first start by talking about the running process, and that is the stages or phases your body and muscles go through as you run. Since running is a part of all sports, this is a good place to start since it will allow me to bring into the discussion other really important aspects about your muscles, your training, different exercises you may be doing or may need to start doing, and how it affects your overall athletic performance. Now, there are three basic phases to the running motion. You've got the push phase, which some people may call the drive phase. You've got the swing phase, which makes up your stride. And you've got the pull phase, or what I sometimes call the return phase. And these three phases make up the running motion for all athletes. Whether it's an Olympic sprinter participating in a 100-meter dash, a football wide receiver running a post route, a baseball player taking off to steal second base, or even a basketball player taking off down court on a fast break, the legs of each of these different athletes has to cycle through each of these same three phases over and over again throughout the entire time they are running. And while there may be different running techniques or styles and perhaps different situations that athletes find themselves in, the muscles involved during each phase of the running process always remains the same. Now, of the three phases, the push phase is the most popular because many people associate it with not only the start of the race, but the entire race as well. And as a result, most of the current speed or sprint training routines today, they really focus on exercises that try to improve this phase only. So the first thing we need to do is define what exactly is meant by the push phase of running, and to help us with this, we're going to show you a video of an athlete running down a football field. Let's take a look at this now. Okay, here we have an athlete on the football practice field, and he's getting set to run a 100-yard dash. He takes off and soon is up to full speed, but it's happening too fast right now to see each phase in action. But if we slow it down, we'll get a chance to stop the video at a point that'll allow us to define the beginning of this push phase. Okay, right here is a good place to stop. Let's take a closer look as to what is going on. The first thing we need to do is create a reference point, and the reference point here is the leg or foot that is in contact with the ground, and in this picture it is his right leg. Now with regards to his right leg, what we are most concerned with is the position of his thigh relative to the ground. The thigh is the region of the body between the hip and the knee. It's also where your quadriceps muscles are located in the front and the hamstring muscles in the back. In this image, we see his thigh is perpendicular to the ground, and so now this position of his leg on the ground with the thigh perpendicular to the ground is of special interest to us here. The thigh is now a more specific point of reference for us here as we begin to define each of the phases of running. And the reason the thigh is chosen and not the calf region or lower leg region is because when it comes to running, or even walking for that matter, the power to move your body forward is initiated at the hip joint first, and then movement at the knees and ankles follow immediately afterward. So as we begin to define each of the running phases, don't pay too much attention to the position of your calf or your lower leg region, since the position and movements of this part of your body are secondary to the thigh and hip joint. The muscle groups responsible for initiating the entire movement of your leg forward and backward are the hip flexors and hip extensors. Sometimes, however, it's easier to refer to these muscle groups as thigh flexors and thigh extensors, since it's easier to visualize the movement of the thigh taking place on the hip, rather than trying to figure out how the hip joint is working. Now that we have a general idea of what is happening, let's focus more specifically on the push phase. With regards to his right leg, we now need to look at the position of his right thigh in relation to the ground. As we noted earlier, in this picture, you'll notice that his right thigh is perpendicular or straight in relation to the ground. This position of his thigh being perpendicular to the ground is the beginning of the push phase for the right leg. If we advance the video a little further, you'll notice that the right thigh is now extending behind him and is no longer perpendicular to the ground. This represents the pushing motion taking place by his right leg and is where we get the name for the push phase. As long as the right foot is in contact with the ground and as long as his right thigh is extended behind him, he is in the push phase. Let's advance the video a little further. Now we see what looks like the last remaining contact the right leg or toes have with the ground, and this signals the end of the push phase. Once the right toes leave the ground, the right leg enters a swing phase, and that'll be the subject of the next video. Let's take a look at this again. Here's the beginning of the push phase. Notice the right thigh is perpendicular to the ground. And here is the end of the push phase. The right thigh is now extended behind his hip, and the right foot is barely touching the ground behind him. The muscle groups involved in the right leg's push phase are the right hip extensors, the right knee extensors, and the right ankle plantar flexors. Now the push phase is an extremely important part of the running process, and it certainly requires a proper amount of training. However, the first thing I hope you get from this video is this. The push phase accounts for only 1/3 of the total running motion, and most exercise equipment in the gym is designed to train muscles that are involved primarily with the push phase of running only, and they don't target the other two phases, and that's the swing phase and the pull phase. For example, you've got leg extension machines for your quads, and that's for knee extension. You've got calf raise machines, which help with ankle plantar flexion. You've got the leg press machines, which helps with both hip and knee extension. And you also got squats, which does the same thing. It helps with both hip and knee extension. Now, all these muscle groups are involved in the push phase. You also have the leg curl machine for your hamstrings, but leg flexion, or knee flexion as they call it, does not make up a big part of the sprinting motion. Your hamstrings are mainly involved in hip extension during the running motion and not knee flexion. Now, most people only think of them as knee flexors, but they are also very powerful hip extensors when trained properly. Therefore, training your hamstrings on a leg curl machine is going to have very little impact on your running speed. Now, you may also be involved in some plyometric type exercises like jumping up and down off of boxes and some hopping and bounding type exercises, which have their purpose. But those two only affect the hip extensors, knee extensors, and ankle plantar flexors, all of which again mainly affect the push phase of running and not the swing phase or pull phase. So now the other thing I hope you get from this first video is this. It's quite possible then that when you leave the gym or perhaps the track, believing that you've done everything imaginable to help improve your running speed, you are leaving behind anywhere from 1/2 to 2/3 of the necessary training required to run faster, jump higher, and kick farther. And this is all because you haven't even considered training for the other two phases of running, and that's the swing phase and the pull phase. And if you leave out training for these two phases entirely, then you are not really training yourself to run, but instead you are really only training yourself to jump. And as odd as this may sound, this motion is easily observed in something like a frog, where all they do is push off and land and push off and land. But you can see just by observing another person run that each leg has to recycle itself again and again in the running motion. And this is something called your turnover rate, and it affects your running speed a great deal. And so now another thing I want to make sure you get from this first video, it's this. Your turnover rate is not controlled by the push phase of running, but rather your turnover rate is controlled by the second and the third phases of running, and that's the swing phase and the pull phase. And if you're like most athletes, including professionals, you probably have never even trained for these two phases, not even once. And so we absolutely need to discuss these two phases, and we're going to do that for you in the next two videos. So the challenge most athletes will face is finding a training program aimed at improving all three phases of running and not just that push phase. There's no point going to the gym each time again and again, day in and day out, and only training for 1/3 of the running motion, is there? And this is where the success of the Run Faster program has really gotten a lot of attention, because it focuses on strengthening and quickening all the muscles in each of the three phases of the running process. And it conditions these muscles in new and in different ways than you normally do. And that alone has incredible benefits for improving an athlete's performance. Now in the next video, I'm going to break down the second phase of running, and that's the swing phase, which affects the length of your stride as well as the speed of your turnover rate. I am also going to talk more about one of the strongest muscle groups in your body, and that's the hip flexor muscles. And I'm going to show you one simple exercise that'll totally transform you in a matter of minutes into a top-notch athlete. You're going to get a chance to do this exercise as well, so be sure to check your email in a day or so for all this incredible information. Until then, watch this video again if you need to, because we're going to build on everything we just talked about here so far in the videos to follow, and you want to be prepared for this. And for one final thought here, I want to commend you for investing your time and your effort into doing all you can to become a better athlete. I respect that, and as a result, I'm going to do all I can to help you reach your athletic goals. And with that, I look forward to seeing you back here again. For athleticquickness.com, I'm Dr. Larry Van Such.